All right, good afternoon, or depending on where you are in the country, good morning to everyone. We're excited to have you joining us as we talk through generational trends in giving this afternoon. I'm Brian Abernathy. I am the general manager with Convergent Nonprofit Solutions. I've had the great opportunity to be working in the fundraising space, both as a nonprofit executive and leader, and also with several years in fundraising campaign consulting and get to lead the great team at Convergent Nonprofit Solutions. If you're not familiar with us, we are a national fundraising consulting firm based in Atlanta, and we help nonprofits of all types with feasibility studies, capital campaigns, and an array of other fundraising services. And I am thrilled today to get to welcome Erin Stinner, CEO at A to Z Communications, to join us. And Erin, I'll let you introduce yourself and A to Z.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning or afternoon to all of you. Thanks for joining us today. I am Erin Stinner. I am the new owner and CEO of A to Z Communications. I joined this firm in 2014, but earlier this year became the owner and CEO, and love being here after a career in communications and marketing and public relations in the government space and also in the education and nonprofit side as well. After I left Washington, I became the chief marketing officer of a college and have served on a number of boards in the education space, senior living, healthcare, and a zoo. So education, the elderly, and animals are kind of my heartstrings. And I love working with our team at A to Z Communications because we are very mission driven ourselves, working with our clients on a wide array of communications initiatives, working on strategy, marketing, digital, public relations, crisis communications, everything you need from A to Z. And we've been doing this since 1988. And our motto has been since then, creative that works, because what we do is strive to deliver data-driven strategies and creative storytelling that works for your organization. So in the past few years, we have worked with some consultants from Convergent Nonprofit Solutions in the education space, marrying fundraising and communications and making that a cohesive plan and execution as we work with them. And that's really why our two organizations have come together today to help you do that within your own organization. So.
Yeah, and I love that line of creative that works. And so we're gonna have a great example here. I'm gonna launch a little quiz for everyone. If we want to look at the differences in generations and how they receive information, we need to know how to call them to action. And so if you look at the numbered circles on the screen, you'll have an opportunity to try to match those to the generation that you think they best represent. Uh, this is why it's so important that we talk about communications and the development trends of different generations at the same time. If we are not connecting the trends, the behaviors, the responses of these generations, and engaging them with our communications and how we talk about not just fundraising, but also the impact that a nonprofit is having, we're going to miss the opportunity to best engage and leverage those connection points for fundraising response, right? There's a whole lot of other value that comes from communication. Obviously, we're talking quite a bit today about the fundraising response piece. So while you are voting here, I'm going to start to talk a little bit about some of the data that we are going to be talking through. So, of course, Giving USA's recent report, Giving by Generation. This was released in April of this year and conducted in 2024. There's some phenomenal data points that came out of this. We are also referencing Classy.org's Why America Gives that was issued back in 2023. And there's different value propositions, different angles of each of these reports. But what we really want to do is understand not just that there are data points out there, but how to apply it. So we know that different generations are thinking differently, they're responding differently. And so having that data point is one thing, but being able to apply it in your nonprofit context, and I say your nonprofit context because it really is about each individual organization and what the data and the grouping, if you will, of your funders looks like. That's going to show us how to leverage opportunity to really move towards more sustainability, how to sustain major gifts funding, how to build endowments, and even how to think about acquisition differences for these different generations. So, what we really hope that you're able to do by the end of the conversation today is to be able to ask some good critical questions that will guide you forward in how you communicate with and fundraise from the constituents for your organization. So we will end our little quiz here and see what we've got. So first one there, U plus $5 equals big change. So this tag and share
Excuse
on
me.
is Gen Z. And we had a few folks, 50% of folks got that right. Millennials were not in there. I'm a little bit surprised. I would have thought younger generation would be the competitor, but Gen Z was, or Gen X was the runner up there. Call to action number two, join the change circle. $25 a month educates 10 girls a year. And the answer here is
Millennial.
millennial. That's right. So there was a phrase that came up a while back, subscription philanthropy, in terms of how millennials engage. So that's a perfect example of that. This third call to action, support the kids. Will thank you for become a sustaining member today. And who is this one? It is
Gen X.
Gen X, that's right. Not baby boomers, but that's a really, really good guess. And of course, that does leave us with the final one here. Leave a lasting legacy. Include us in your estate plan and transform lives for generations. That's, of course, baby boomers. So, just some fun little dynamics on how folks are responding and this sets up a great place to start talking about why it's so important to understand the personas of these different generations. So, Erin, tell us a little bit about why personas are so important as we think about this.
Yes, thank you. So we are going to do a deeper dive into these four persona, the generations, boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z today, and how we can help you cultivate these donors and increase your yields. But our mission, working with our nonprofit friends, is to creatively and strategically tell stories in all mediums that are going to move your audiences to action and to give. So early in our partnerships, we work with nonprofits to develop donor personas. And you may have these already. If you do, we work with you to refine them, add statistical information. But really, their donor personas are one of the most important and strategic tools in your fundraising kit because they help you move from generic messaging to a meaningful conversation. And we know that in fundraising, relationships drive results. And fundraising is about emotions and connections. And donors are not giving because of facts, they're giving because of feelings. So these personas help us tap into those emotions by putting a face to the story and motivations behind your audiences so that we can target your donor types deliberately and intentionally. And these will also help you to prioritize. We know that increasingly we have fewer people on our teams, fewer resources at our disposal. So we can't always meet everyone where we want to. We have to be selective sometimes in which donors, which audiences we are pursuing most aggressively, where we're putting those resources. So these donor personas will help us understand how to reach those important target audiences more effectively with right messages at the right time and in the right channels.
And from all of that, converting the right giving and the right channels for folks to give from each of those. So, we're going to walk through first some of the giving dynamics for each of these generations. So, we'll start with boomers. One of the most important things that I think is worth noting as we think about boomers is endowment planned giving. There is the last estimate I read, $84 trillion with a big capital T that is expected to change hands over the next couple of decades, going from boomers and the silent generation to Gen X and millennials. So, right now, as you can see, boomers represent not a majority in terms of more than 50%, but the largest section of total giving for nonprofits. So, Right now, they're moving towards a place in life where their capacity to give, the structure of how they give is going to change. But for most nonprofits, what the Why America Gives report talks about as traditional donors, which is boomers and Gen X, they're still the largest funders, right? So these are typically the funders, and as we slide to Gen X here, who are giving to keep nonprofits afloat, right? And so thinking about how to change engagement and sustain them while taking advantage of younger generations is going to be important. Gen X, my generation here is disappointing me a little bit because they represent not as large of a portion of total giving, but they are the most likely to be volunteering. That's a really interesting dynamic to look at. We do know for most nonprofits, volunteers oftentimes are very low-hanging fruit to convert to donors. And so there's some unique opportunity there. But we've got to recognize that in some cases, Gen X is getting leapfrogged a little bit here. So moving towards millennials, we see where that's coming in. Uh, Millennials represent already more of the total giving, and they have now eclipsed baby boomers as the largest portion of the US workforce. And so I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics. We could try to guess at some of the trends and factors that have shaped both of these things. But from a very high level perspective, based on what we are seeing in the trends, I would say that millennials may be the best target market for that next generation of sustaining major gifts funders, right? We don't want to sleep on Gen X because, as we noted before, it's Gen X and millennials that are going to be inheriting a vast sum of wealth over years ahead. But right now, that acquisition, cultivation opportunity for millennials seems very, very significant based on our review of the data. And then last but not least, Gen Z. I've got to note that the Giving USA report that came out in April is one of the first to really take an intentional look as deeply as it did from the angles that it did on Gen Z. So they deserve a lot of credit there. And part of the dynamic playing there is just the simple age factor, right? So the oldest of Gen Z are in their late 20s today. So they're really just entering into what we would think of as a philanthropic life, stepping into getting engaged with and supporting nonprofits. Some fascinating dynamics that we've seen from some other reports. They're planning for philanthropy and nonprofit involvement more than any earlier generation. And as you can see here, 30% have already donated to a charity. So they're not waiting until they get well into their career to start to give. They're jumping right in. And so there's going to be some really unique opportunity, I think, but also a little bit to sit and watch to see where this generation progresses as they sort of come into their own over the years ahead. So, in summary, who's giving more? Once again, we see millennials jumping over Gen X. So, this is the increase in giving for each generation since 2021. Boomers are still leading the way in philanthropy, giving even more. They were leading the pack in 21, but they're continuing to increase how they're giving. Millennials have jumped ahead of Gen X and giving a 22% increase over a few years ago. And Gen Z is not going to be left in the dust. They're jumping right in as well. So, things that we want to keep in mind on all this information before we start to shift to how we communicate is those traditional funders, Gen X and boomers, they're still giving 81% of the large gifts. This is your major gift opportunity. We do a lot of capital campaigns. I could probably count on both hands the number of Gen Z and millennials who are playing large, meaningful roles in capital campaigns, but they are stepping into that annual support, that sort of sustainable, lower level entry point for giving. And we've got to remember the transition for boomers. This is an opportunity as well as potentially a threat for some nonprofits. If there's an over reliance on that annual sustaining major gift funding from boomers, as they're moving from income based giving late in their career, senior level roles, and moving towards asset based giving, you've got to be able to engage them to move towards planned giving and talking about estates. But at the same time, nobody wants to be hoping for a funeral, right? You've got to think about how to rebuild that major gift funding. Again, I think one of the biggest opportunities there long term is going to be millennials, so that as your baby boomer funders are moving out of their income-based giving, you're backfilling, excuse me, so that the organization does not go through a sustainability crisis while your funder base is evolving. And so all of that means we got to communicate and get these folks to engage in the way that's most appealing to them. So, Erin, share with us a little bit about how to best communicate.
Thanks, Brian. So we're going to go through the generations once again, taking a lens of what is motivating them, what are they feeling, what are they thinking, and we see with boomers, like Brian said, they are your biggest major donors. They're concerned about legacies and not just yours, but their own. So we all know Mr. and Mrs. Jingleheimer Schmidt, we'll call them today, who loves to see their name on things, buildings, programs, you name it. They want to be recognized for their contributions to your organization, your campus. And they still care about leadership societies, president circles. This generation wants that recognition, whether they can afford to have their name on the building or not. They want to feel a part of that. They want to feel valued. And we, like Brian said, we want to be talking with them about their estates. They may have been set already, but it's never too late to deepen those personal connections that you have with them and your organization to appeal to that sense of tradition and legacy. The planned giving does connect with their thinking about long-term impact. Once they are no longer here, what are people remembering them for? So that is important with this generation. They care more about your organization's history and stability than some of the younger generations. So you'll see that as a motivating factor as well with boomers. Gen X, like Brian said, we kind of leapfrog them sometimes. They get left out of the picture in social discourse and in giving sometimes, and they're not really minding that. They don't hate that they are flying under the radar. They like, boomers taking the heat for being out of touch. They like rolling their eyes at the Gen Z for their social antics. But they are still a very powerful donor segment. They're in their prime earning years. However, they are sandwich generation in a lot of cases where they're paying for college for their kids, and they're also looking at paying for care for their parents, perhaps. So they are a precarious bunch because of that, and they can be also skeptical of hype as you message to them. So we need to think about that. We'll talk about that a little later. But they are very loyal to their causes. Once they give, they tend to stay. And they have a very favorable reaction to well-reasoned appeals because they tend to be very pragmatic. Millennials are very purpose-driven givers. They care deeply, but they also grew up during two economic downturns and the rise of digital and social connectivity. So they're more financially stable than the Gen Z, their younger counterparts, but they're more skeptical than boomers. They're more like Gen X in that respect. We have to reach out to them with purpose and very carefully crafted messaging. They need to feel that their values are matched by your mission and organization. They need to see a broader purpose, and they will do research before they give online. Having a modern, trustworthy online digital presence is essential for you to resonate with this generation. And now for Gen Z, they are flipping everything we do on its head, both in fundraising and in communications, and we have to adapt. The Gen Z are planning for philanthropy with a lot of intentionality. Like Brian said, it could be a major impact for your organization to tap into this generation early, but they are a little less loyal. So once you make that connection with Gen Z, you have to maintain it. So you have to stay relevant to them. You have to show your value to them. They are digital natives who prioritize authenticity, equity, and tangible impact. So communicating that on a regular basis is really important. They also need to know that your organization is transparent. They want to know where exactly their money is going, kind of at the micro campaign level. That's why annual giving can be a little generic for them. They want to give to a specific cause within your organization. So be mindful of that as we're communicating to them. But they are very passionate and they do want to make a difference right now. Like Brian said, they may not be in their prime earning years, but 30% are already giving. So you want to capture that and have them stay with you through their journey as a philanthropist.
One of the most important factors in fundraising engagement is leveraging influence. And there's some really interesting data points around what generation is influenced by what voices, what channel of communication. Uh, Ultimately, all of that is data, but the most important data for each nonprofit, each school, whatever the case may be, is looking at your current funders and identifying which influencers and which activities are delivering results in both acquiring and advancing and increasing funding from the funders you have. That's probably your best lens into what's going to continue to attract and increase funders. There's so many unique dynamics that absent from organizational context, um, it is precarious to try to jump to conclusions on how to go forward. A community college may have very different angles of influence and trends for communication than a YMCA or a museum or a Boys and Girls Club. So, what we would say here is as you think about influence for different generations among your funders, take the time to learn what has motivated the folks who are your most loyal funders today. How did they come in to know the organization? What got them started in giving, and how have they progressed? What have been their motivators and the areas of influence there? And so the big thing we need to take away from that is we've got to meet these funders where they are. So Erin, share with us a little bit about how we can start to approach plugging into folks where they're at.
Sure, Brian, thank you. Like you said, where we meet them is important as what we message them with. So the content does matter. We're going to see in the future slides here how each generation prefers to be communicated with. Generally, there are outliers, of course, but we also want to talk about what kind of content appeals to them. And we know that 88% of donors indicated that they do give to direct mail, but in different ways. We'll talk about that. And word of mouth is still a critical means for sending your messaging to their audiences. The peer-to-peer and email are still very effective modes of driving responses.
And one of the most surprising things to me out of this report was the role that direct mail still plays. The fact that it motivates more than half of millennial recipients to make a gift. Now, it noted they're making that gift online, but as someone who rarely looks at the mail that shows up in their mailbox, I was very surprised to see the value that direct mail has sustained. And so there's an interesting paradigm there where we're blending traditional communication with new media engagement and response that I think is a good paradigm to keep in mind as we think through these channels and content.
It's something to keep in mind too with your budgets because everyone's budget is shrinking. So for those direct mail appeals that you're sending out, if you're able to segment your audiences by generation, maybe you only send reply envelopes to your boomers. Because even with Gen X, they get the direct mail, they respond to it, but they're tending to respond via QR code and make their donations online, as you would expect the millennials and Gen Z to do. So there are a lot of takeaways here that we can use for our budgeting purposes to help us conserve our resources, use them more effectively. But boomers, as we look at them and how they like to be communicated with, you can see that email, direct mail that we just discussed are still critical, but phone is an important connection. They still would like those prompts, those nudges by phone. They develop personal relationships with their points of contact within organizations. They want to be stewarded through personalized communication, and often that is in person or on the phone. And though they like the data, they still want the annual reports. But again, maybe you're printing for certain generations and not for all. Maybe it's just an electronic report for our younger generations. But they like the newsletters. They like donor spotlights. They like seeing their peers featured. They hope that they too can be featured in your communications. So that print is still important with the boomers. For Gen X, we have to bridge the online, offline communication channels. You can find them on their phones more than the boomers, and email is still effective with Gen X. But certain solicitations and appeals should still be mailed. But like I said, they're going to perhaps respond via QR code and give online. But this is a hybrid generation that we have to expect to write well for them and personalize for them, tying into their personal values, their family history, their local community. We have to make it very personalized for them individually. And more than an annual report, they want to see impact. We should be highlighting very grounded stories of hope and progress, not hyperbole and pie in the sky types of things necessarily with Gen X, because they are a skeptical bunch. But they do want to see that your organization is making a meaningful impact. So I think those are the stories that resonate well with this generation, which I'm a part of as well. For millennials, website content is so influential to them making a decision to give online. So in addition to your website, this is where Facebook, Instagram, kind of in this generation, we see the older millennials spending more time on Facebook. With the younger, it's definitely Instagram. But the peer shared fundraising, impact storytelling on those channels is so meaningful for them. They resonate with that, with the emotions. And as we said, they don't give to data, they give to feelings. So emails can be good for the update reports, impact reports, status on campaigns, but it still needs to be personalized, telling stories about how you are making a difference in the lives of those that they care about. They're on LinkedIn as well. So they're in their prime earning years. They're approaching their prime earning years. So we want to reach out to them on LinkedIn. And this could be a good opportunity for you to do some board recruitment with millennials to get them more engaged in volunteering. But our content for this generation needs to be snappier. They want infographics over paragraphs. They want video over print. They want to connect with these stories rather than read an annual report. So our content should reflect that. Taking it even a step further, like I said, our Gen Z is flipping everything on its head. They want video all the time. They want to be on their phone. They are constantly connected. They are digital natives, and they are expecting your organization to function similarly. So whether you have a lot of volunteers in your Gen Z space working in advancement communications on your teams with you as staff or volunteers, you really need to tap into those skills, because while it may not be comfortable for everyone on this call to be on TikTok, Instagram, that's where this generation is. And like Brian said, we really have to meet them where they are, and we have to engage them early and then keep them engaged. They're not as loyal. They're more fickle. So just because they give 1 year or one campaign does not mean they're going to stay with you the way the boomers did. So we have to continually engage with them. That means keeping our editorial calendars fresh, proactive, increasing our cadence as we reach out to them, not just with appeals, but with cultivation and stewardship, keeping them interested, engaged, and understanding the impact that your organization is delivering.
And through all of that, one thing that is prevalent is the role of digital engagement. Even where those direct mail campaigns, the traditional communication channels are affecting responsive gifts, those gifts are tending to come in via smartphones still, or via the internet. So this smartphone giving is kind of leveled out with the traditional funders and boomers and Gen X, and it's actually declined a little bit among Gen Z. I'd love to see some of the factors that are shaping that, but that level of detail was not in the report. And then it's surged among millennials. So as Erin noted, that is the way to start to get messages to millennials. They're seeing that direct mail, they're responding, they're going online to respond, and the online stories are helping to close that gift, that response to the appeal or the story, to move them into whatever that next gift or level of engagement may be.
So as we talked about the channels and the types of content, we also need to be mindful of how we speak with these audiences because it's not the same. As we demonstrated early in the webinar here with our calls to action that are different by generation, how we speak with them it's personalizing it to that audience. And it's more than just insert field first name. This is about the words we use and the tone we use. So these four bubbles here that you see are encapsulating how we should be reaching out to these different audiences. With our boomers, we want to be transparent, emotionally intelligent, empowering, and that shifts as we work through the generations to even more transparency, but being authentic. We hear that word tossed around so often with the younger generations. If they see a celebrity giving, that doesn't necessarily mean as much as some of their peers giving, or an activist that's local to them, or their cause, your organization. So it needs to be more personalized and taking into consideration these tones. And then the middle generations, the Gen X, the Millennials, they want to command respect. So our language to them should be respectful. It should be competent, mission oriented. But taking all of this into consideration as we personalize content, it's not just about what we say, where we say it, but how we say it.
When I was working for a nonprofit, raising money to meet a budget on an annual basis, uh, our bread and butter was recurring monthly donations. That was what we built our support base around. So one of the really surprising things that we saw in this recent Giving USA report that creates a potential threat for many nonprofits in that place is that across the board, every generation's preference is towards moving away from recurring monthly giving. We've talked about how some of the younger generations are definitely less loyal, also doing much more research before making a gift. They want to hear the impact, they want to hear the stories. And so that giving is becoming, particularly with the younger generations, but also with traditional funders, much more responsive than automatic in the past. So when we think about this, it means that our engagement matters more and more. And the engagement message matters, but so does the frequency. If funders are responding to communications with a gift, it means that our cadence of engagement and messaging of opportunity that we need funders to step in on has got to be consistent, or we're going to see volatility among cash flow, frankly, especially when you start to think about organizations where this type of giving has been a sustaining dynamic, maybe from some of the more traditional funders historically who have just set the auto pay, right? Years ago, I mentioned earlier, we heard this phrase subscription philanthropy thrown around, thinking, hey, younger generations are just going to sign up and they're gonna let it hit their debit card or their credit card every month, and we're just gonna have them, right? Well, it would show in the data that that is not the case now, as many thought it may be. So the frequency of communication, as well as the stories and the channels, is going to be very, very important to continue to maintain consistency among what we're really starting to talk about more as responsive giving.
One of the things we do tend to see consistency in with organizations we work with are the events. And I just want to touch upon that for a moment because we've focused on communication channels so much today, but also taking into mind your budget conscious decisions that you're making every day. How much time, how many resources do you put into the events that you put on annually, quarterly? Who are you reaching with those, and which generations are responsive to them? If you're doing a golf outing every year and you're getting great boomer participation, but no Gen Z, no millennials, is that effective strategy for the long term? Do we want to move our events into categorization by generation so that we can appeal to them with events and meaningful engagements that they're going to spend their time and money on? I mean, so for Gen Z, you might do, duck pin bowling or something, a little different than a golf outing that's so time consuming that the Gen Z and millennials do not have the time for or the interest in. So I think that's another way that we can talk about personas, generations, why they matter, and how they can help you make better decisions in all of your communications and your events and planning.
Yeah, and that's a great place to think about the ROI of those events. And again, knowing your funder base and what's engaging and cultivating them. We're going to move into a few takeaways here. As we do this, I want to point out we're going to have some time for questions. So if you've got any questions for Erin or myself, feel free to go ahead and drop those into the Q&A. As you think about fundraising takeaways, this is certainly not original to Convergent, but maybe you've heard of the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, and act, and then go back through that process. There are so many shiny things that we can chase in fundraising, right? I would say the most important starting point is to know where you're at today. Find and understand the data you can on your constituency. Who is funding? What generations do they represent? How did you acquire them? Then orient yourself with that data and the opportunity that's ahead of you. What are the threats that emerge? What are potentially the biggest areas of opportunity that you need to figure out how to take advantage of? Narrowly focus on some of those, figure out a way to track data and see the response rate. And then as we move into this decide step, determine a couple areas of focus. Don't try to boil the ocean. You can't convert your entire funder base overnight. Start with the things that will either seize the biggest opportunity or eliminate the biggest threat. And then look for low-hanging fruit as you do that, so that as we look at ACT, you move in one or two key areas. As you implement these strategies, you're measuring your results and you're adapting. You're going back up to a new point of observation, and you start to move through a cycle. And there's all kinds of frameworks for this out there, from moves management to any number of other things, where you're going to learn more and more about your committed funders that's going to help you create more committed funders in the future.
Thanks. And as we talk about messaging, communications, takeaways from this, I'd like for everybody to give some thought to your personas in your own donor base and your potential prospective donors. If you have the data now to make those silos in your database, do that. Segment your audiences, and not just by generation, but by interest. You might be an organization that has a lot of different missions under one umbrella. So it's not just about the age demographic, it's about psychographics as well, and targeting your messaging to those different personas intentionally. Also, as we look at communications, we want to clarify our messaging. It's more important as attention spans are decreasing, even in all the generations, but especially the younger ones. They're not going to read a five paragraph appeal letter. Boomers might. Gen X might read 4, Millennials 3, and Gen Z is looking at an Instagram story and reel. So it's not you have to simplify. You have to boil it down to what your key messaging is, your impact, what you're asking for, and then simplify the process too. As you go through the donor giving cycle, how are they giving? Again, with the boomers, they might still want the reply envelope and send you a check, but that's not going to work for all of your audiences. So make your online giving very simplistic, very easy, make it painless. The transactions should be simplistic and easy to follow. And also with your appreciations, cater those to the different generations. The boomers may want a handwritten note from your leadership, from your major gift officers, but that doesn't work with the younger generations. A video from those who are benefiting from the donation is a great way to appreciate your younger generations of donors. And think too about sharing, because Gen Z is the generation that will share your communications. So make it easy for them to do that. Make it create hashtags that make it a connected communication tapestry, if you will, with your online presence, your website, your social channels. Make everything shareable for those younger generations so that you're expanding your reach organically to their friends and potential donors to your organization.
So we mentioned at the outset of the call that data is great, but data that doesn't inform activity is really just sort of interesting numbers, right? So, how do we execute on this? There's a couple of things we want to share with you. Number one, coming up in a few weeks, Convergent's hosting a comprehensive campaign webinar. And in every nonprofit space that we are working right now, we are recommending nonprofits consider the comprehensive campaign approach. It may or may not be right for everyone, but the reason it's such an opportunity to maximize appeals is you can segment your messaging and you can go after engaging capital funding, addressing endowment, and building annual support all through a cohesive vision. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we hope you'll join us for that webinar. We'll share that in a follow-up email. And then there's also opportunity for audits, both development or communications audit with Convergent or A to Z. And we've got some slides. You can snap these QR codes and get more information from either organization on how to move forward. We're also going to send a follow-up email after the webinar today. It's going to have a few, call them critical questions that nonprofit leaders, advancement professionals can ask themselves about their organization to start you down the pathway of identifying the places to focus first, assessing what your opportunities may be, and figuring out where your first steps may need to lead so that you can start to see some positive results in better engaging each of these generations. We're, as Erin said earlier, meeting them where they're at.
We are
Thanks,
happy
Brian.
to take questions in the chat. And I think Brian has some poll questions too that we can offer up if we don't have a lot of questions. And we're both reachable after the webinar through those QR codes. Please reach out to us or connect with us on LinkedIn, email us.
Thank you, Brian and Erin, so much for sharing your insights this afternoon. I do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Hi, Erin. Amanda McQuillan here. Thanks for the invite and for a great webinar. Will the recording of this be available for me to share with our team, and will you share the slides?
Yes and yes. Thanks, Amanda, for joining.
All right, thank you, Erin. And next question from Angel. For major gifts, what are some things you can share to identify prospects for giving? Any pointers you can share?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I won't give the non-answer answer of it's important to understand the trends for your organization, but that is important. Most of the time, major gifts funders are not jumping in necessarily with a major gift right out of the gate. So one of the important things to think through is understanding affinity and capacity. Who loves your organization, maybe is involved at a maybe a modest level today, and leaning into conversation, sharing stories again in those generationally appropriate channels to figure out what their motivators are. Why is it that you have? I'll give a great real life example from the community where I live. A hospital president shared this with me several years ago. A funder whose fingerprints are all over this community. They sent out a direct mail appeal, and they got a abnormally large check in response. It was, I think, it was $500. And so it was a, hey, this is not the normal response. We should follow up with this person. We should learn what it was that led them to a response that didn't match our norm. And a sit down follow up from that turned that funder into one of the most significant major gifts and even capital and naming funders that that organization has seen. So, responding when things look interesting is a great way to watch for prospects that you could move up into the major gift space.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, another question from Gail. I am a baby boomer, and about legacy, are you saying to focus on them for legacy donors?
So maybe not focusing exclusively. There's still some of the silent generation out there that are great places to talk about planned giving and estate giving, but realizing that baby boomers who are your current major gifts funders, As Erin noted, they're highly committed to the history and the future of your organization. Uh, they're going to want to know that you're going to be able to continue the work that they've supported for years. So, a really simple way to start with this in your communications is just adding a simple box. Hey, would you be interested in learning more about planned or non-traditional gift avenues? It may be that they want to start doing once they hit retirement age, direct transfer from a qualified retirement account just for tax purposes. That's a great benefit to the donor, and it's an easy way to get lined up on some non-traditional giving for a nonprofit. But the first step in that is always just communicating to those funders that those avenues exist. If you don't have those set up, I would encourage you to contact a local community foundation. Most of the time, they can plug and play, create an endowment structure, non-cash asset, gift receipt process. They'll have policies and everything in place to make that very easy for most nonprofits to get started in.
All right.
Thinking about boomers and legacy too, it's also important to talk about how boomers' legacies can be impacted in their own families with giving, right? Brian, if you want to talk about that, we've talked about multi-generational giving in families and how important that can be.
Yeah, that's a great point. We know that these older generations are going to be handing over a great deal of wealth. Um, and they've set a legacy that I think in a lot of cases, if we as nonprofit leaders can set up pathways for them to invite their children or grandchildren into their legacy of philanthropy, there's some organizations that we've worked with that it has been unbelievably transformative for matriarchs and patriarchs of a family to carry their children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews along their side with the history of these nonprofits. And now, as some of those older generations are gone, their children and grandchildren are stepping up to name things for those organizations in their memory at significant levels because they were taught to do so. And so they've got this deep personal connection, which we've already said is very meaningful for the younger generations. And they want to see that continue, partly for the nonprofit, but honestly, partly for the memory and the love of their parents and grandparents as well.
Great insight. Thank you both. All right. We have time for a couple more questions. I did have another question come in. How do we start to figure out the age demographics of our donor base?
So this is a great question, and we talked about you've got to start where you are. Uh, I would venture to say most nonprofits probably don't have birthdays for all of their funders. There are some ways that you can guess responsibly. I wouldn't necessarily call somebody and say, "Hey, my guess is you're this many years old," but thinking about some of the behaviors of your funders based on some of the traits we've talked about, even that you're wagering, right? So what I would say is thoughtfully considering how to survey and collect information from your funders. So as you do this, you need to remember that the younger the generation, the more skeptical they are of what they're going to be plugging their info into. So you're going to want to proactively connect that into how how those funders will want to engage with your organization. Tell us about what's most valuable to you in the work that we do. What was it that first led you to ABC nonprofit? You're supporting the school, you're not an alum. What was it that got us on your radar, right? And then from there, what are your preferred communication channels? What's the best way to communicate our impact with you? We'd love to celebrate you. Would you share your birthday? Some folks may not, but create those ways to help your funders tell you how to best engage them. More often than not, your most committed funders are a picture of what your most significant opportunity for new funders is. So there's a lot to learn there. And for those generations that are active on LinkedIn, I do this all the time. It would be very slow to do with a large database, but if you need to make a guess, jump in there, see where they went to school, when they graduated, what their working history looks like. You can make some educated guesses using LinkedIn and sometimes Facebook as well, depending on what information people have out there.
That surveying that Brian mentioned is critical, and it's important to understand your donors better. And he mentioned asking for the birthday, asking if we can celebrate you. There's a hook there that is going to require some action on your end. And if you have a CRM, donor engagement software, that will help you automate this, all the better. But making it a point to send them an email on their birthday, celebrating them. So you're taking their birthday, but then you have to follow up with a message annually on their birthday. That's a great way to do it. Shows that you are thinking of them, you are appreciative of them, and you're not asking for anything in that communication. You're simply celebrating them, and that's a fun way to do it as well.
And a appropriately set up database is probably going to automate 99%, if not 100% of that process. So you just set it and forget it sort of deal. Not that you want relationships to be on autopilot, but some of the mechanical pieces of that can be simplified. As we've already noted, sometimes staff time and capacity is limited. So that's one of those places. An audit of your communications or your development process is going to show areas of efficiency that can be brought in to simplify engagement.
All right, we have one more question. They said, we're not highly digital. What are some of the platforms that we should start to engage with?
Great question. I think it will depend on your donor base. So if your donors are in the boomer and Gen X space, then your digital activity should probably be focused more on LinkedIn and Facebook. But if you are looking to cultivate donors in the younger generations, you're going to have to kind of dive into the deep end of the pool there probably and get more familiar with TikTok and Instagram, so that you can engage with them. So if your resources are limited, if your skill set may be lacking in that area, pick one or two where you see the most opportunity with your prospective donors or your current donors, and commit to that versus a little bit here, a little bit there.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Brian. Thank you both for sharing your insights on this Generational Trends in Giving webinar. That does conclude the webinar, and we thank you so much for attending. We will be sharing an email with the presentation and a copy of the webinar. We hope to see you at the next event. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.